I've always been passionate about analytics and strategy. I played like poker a ton before. That was kind of my big thing before this. Valorant was my first esport ever. So no CS:GO, no Overwatch, no background on anything. So 100 Thieves was a good one where I did do a little bit of like anti-strat with the
Okay.
data. Yes, we do scrim, but I know that's breaking news.
Somebody who's got a pretty big brain. And you know what? He's got a little bit of aim. It's our interview that we've got lined up for you guys. It's Weltis of Sentinels, the analyst, joining the squad from seemingly, and I could be wrong, seemingly from Twitter analyst to pro esports analyst with Sentinels. Weltis, first and foremost, thank you so much for joining us. Yeah, who is Weltis? Who is Weltis?
Well, thanks, Tanner, for the intro. Weltis is that's a great question. If you're being literal, the username I stole the username from my brother. It's a Minecraft account
Okay.
when I was like 13, and I don't know the meaning of it, so I can't really answer who is Weltis technically. But I guess for myself, like you said, I kind of started posting random stuff on Twitter about 6 months ago, mostly about Sentinels because I was just like the masses and was a big fan of them. And some honestly more harsh than others, but it kind of just kind of escalated, and I just kept posting stuff that I found that it was interesting, and using the data in Valorant, and I kind of got the gig, as most of you may know, and so here I am today. Yeah.
Yeah, here you are today with that. So before this, right? You start this kind of road on Twitter, tossing out the analyst stuff. It really gets picked up by everybody. I mean, even before you were signed, right? You've got like the sideshows and the podcast kind of around the world seeing your stats and what you're putting out there. What were you doing before this, right? What kind of piqued your interest into wanting to dive into, esports analysis?
Yeah, it's a great question. So truthfully, Valorant was my first esport ever. So no CS:GO, no Overwatch, no background on anything. So um, I basically started in quarantine because everyone was really bored and had nothing to do, and Valorant just kind of launched at honestly, I think, a perfect time. Um, Riot was really smart to launch the pandemic at that time.
Yeah.
But no, just joking. But basically, I started playing Valorant. But I was also starting work as a consultant. So I come from a business slash finance background, so not super related to data or video games really at all. But um, there's some math in business, though it's not too difficult. But I've always been passionate about analytics and strategy. I've played like poker a ton before. That was kind of my big thing before this. I played like I think mm, throughout college 4 years of poker, like thousands and thousands and thousands of hours of more just very degenerate, honestly, just gambling. Um, but poker comes with a lot of math and a lot of strategy. So I kind of carried that into Valorant,
Mm.
where I saw like, hey, this is a new sport, so it's understandable, but there's not many people out there using data at all, either publicly or probably within teams or in the broadcast or in the analysis, Reddit, media, whatever it is. And so I just thought that for myself, I want to learn like for myself when I'm watching a game,
Yeah.
who's good at what, who's bad at what, why are they good, or stuff like that. And I just thought I'd share what I found, and from there it just kind of took off.
Yeah, I mean, so obviously, I've been looking your chat. By the way, shameless plug for him, just in case he doesn't do it. He's
'Cause he
he's been
won't.
doing analysis co-streams. Obviously, being a fellow coach and analyst myself, I know I get questions all the time about like how do we do the things we do. Well, he's literally streaming it, so check it out. Weltis Games on Twitch. Boom, gotcha, bro.
Is.
Boom,
Anyways,
boom. There
you
we
say
go.
that you sort of you came to this from poker, and a lot of people weren't applying numbers yet. Obviously, I come in from the exact same boat. Where did you sort of get your quantitative skill set? Was it something that you sort of grew yourself while you were working with the poker things? Did you work in stats prior? Like,
Mm.
where is it, and sort of how have you had to sort of build it and tweak it to make it compatible with Valorant esports?
Yeah, it's a good question. Honestly, I've always been a pretty quantitative guy. Like, math has just been my favorite subject in school, and so um, I think for honestly the basic kind of stats I started with in analytics, you really don't need much of a background. So I get a ton of questions like, oh, how can I get started? And as long as you know really multiplication and division, you can do most of the things I do. And, it's kind of like the harder thing to do. The skill set that's a bit harder, honestly, is not the math. It's kind of learning to figure out what's important, what's not, and how to
Mm.
communicate that information and distill this because there's a ton of data available, but people need to be able to comprehend and understand it in a quick way. That's so that I think I've kind of learned through my business background because when we're talking to clients, you're trying to make some stuff that may be difficult to understand pretty easy and concise and quick. And you're trying to draw out the most important things when you're talking to the CEO, right, of a business. They don't have time to hear your 1 hour presentation about
Yeah.
what you think is wrong or right about the industry or whatever. So I honestly think a lot of my business background helped me at least with the kind of soft skills part of data, which is a really underestimated skill if you want to be that type of analyst.
So I want to kind of ask you a little bit more to build onto that, to how you got to the Sentinels. So obviously you're posting on Twitter. You're really getting into the meat of things. You see an opening in terms of the lack of potential that people aren't exploiting and things like that. So how did you get in contact with the Sentinels, and how are you able to kind of convince them that you were the guy, or do they contact you and then you were able to give them this pitch? And what
Yeah.
kind of, and even beyond that, I want to know, like, what kind of things are you saying to them, that maybe you could give us some examples of these soft skills that you're talking about?
Great question. So yeah, I just applied. So the way the process worked, if you guys don't know, was Raucus. I think it was either Raucus or the Sentinel's main Twitter tweeted out, "Hey, we're doing analyst positions for LCQ." And initially, I was like, "Oh, I love Sentinels and I love Valorant data, but I wouldn't be an analyst because my role was not really analysty. I'd never helped a team. I was kind of just on
Mhm.
the like reporting side or doing things that truth be told aren't necessarily like helpful for a team, right? If you're trying to, for example, one things I've been doing in champs is just trying to rank teams and try to put a metric to how good teams are. Like Sentinels don't really care about that, right? That's not important to
Mhm.
that wouldn't help them win. So the skill set was a bit not I didn't see the direct, I guess, one to one. But I kind of a lot of my friends said just apply. You're probably smart enough to learn it, and it's a cool opportunity. So I was like, yeah, you know what, I'll just apply. So I wrote basically the process was pretty simple, but you would just I think they just had you write an email to Raucus. Um, Probably use some like kind of businessy skills to kind of make that email like a little bit, like I guess just like impactful and not that many words, kind of
Mhm.
in that sense. So that might have helped. But I also tweeted. I mean, having clout definitely helped because I literally added Rob Moore saying, "Hey, I submitted an application, by the way. Just FYI," and he's like forwarded to
Yeah.
Raucus or something. So um, honestly, like yeah, the Twitter clout already kind of helped. That's typical Sen, right? Loving the clout. But um, basically after that, I had a call with Raucus. Pretty long call. But he kind of just talked about we talked about everything, but the few questions he asked about why what I could were basically what I could bring to the table. Um, Knowing that he explained basically like Sen wasn't really using data, and
Mhm.
most teams aren't. I think so. It's not like they were behind. It's just like the truth is, no, not many teams are. I think. Think it's getting better now, but still a ton of opportunities. So I basically just kind of without getting into the technicals, basically said, look, um, you know I understand, like heard what he was coming from about his basically thoughts on data. No, there's an opportunity, but also understand that we don't want data to be the sole driver because I agree that data in Valorant's limited. The sample size is not too great. You have to be careful about how you use it. So kind of just resonated with that and explained for him. Basically, came with a few ideas immediately. Okay, this is the few things I would do that I think would drive the highest impact for you guys, and kind of came with like kind of my pitch to him how I could actually help them in the near
Mhm.
term. And so that I think that resonated a lot with him. And yeah, I mean, turnaround was quick though because I think LCQ was like within a month, so they kind of that might have expedited things a bit. So I kind of got, you know, I got the confirmation from Raucus and the management team like a week later, and even then it was a kind of a tight turnaround. So I think there was like 2.5 weeks to LCQ, so we kind of just got rolling from there.
So and now that is this is I don't know if this is kind of taking a step back here, but all that going into it, you apply and they're like, hey, you're there. What then, right? Day of them saying, hey, we want you to be a part of our squad. What was that like for you, right? Because you come from a pretty commercial background, not
Yeah,
esports background, to now 6 months later, you're the an analyst an assisting analyst in the largest, I would say that,
yeah.
or the organization, excuse me, that is kind of monopolizing Valorant, grabbing up everybody that, we've seen join the scene. What was that like? Your first day, were you able to drink that in, or was it difficult to really kind of let that sit because you did have to get to work right away?
Well, yeah, I think I might have. I forget if the teams had like it was a weird like time period where they were just going to boot camp. So I think there was like literally a day or two where they were like moving in. So it wasn't like,
Mhm.
okay, we have scrims, let's go go go. So I think I had fortunately good timing. Like I didn't have to like immediately drop everything I was doing, kind of thing, because I was still working my other job, and that's a whole
Right.
nother story. But I managed the lucky thing about my consulting firm is they actually gave me an opportunity to take a break for a while to kind
Mhm.
of try this out, which is really dope. Um, but yeah, I mean, it I honestly I didn't kind of expect to get it because Raucus had said they were talking to a few people. So I was like, okay, you know what? Like, there's maybe five people that potential like candidates or something. So 20% shot or whatever.
Mhm.
So I was pretty surprised when I got it, given like my lack of just like overall experience and never basically actually being a true analyst for a team. But yeah, like I kind of was like, holy shit, I'm on Sentinels, and this is pretty freaking awesome. And yeah, I mean, like I don't know, man. It was pretty dope. Just thinking about like the Twitter followers, that was honestly the thing. No, I'm just joking. I've been brainwashed. I've been brainwashed by the clout. But yeah, I mean, it was really cool, and it was honestly like I never thought this would happen. I never thought I would
Mhm.
be honestly an analyst of any team. I just did this as a really just my own hobby and passion, just
Right.
posting my own thoughts. And now yeah, I'm with like the biggest org in Valorant. So really a crazy like this is it's not replicable. I'm kind of like get scared that people in the scene think they can just join a tier one team, and I was super fortunate. Honestly, I think like the stars aligned, but I don't think. Yeah, I think it's going to be pretty hard.
It's all pretty crazy. I mean, like, having gone through sort of the same process myself of like, this is a hobby. Oh, by the way, now you're doing it as your main gig. Like, it's something you can't replicate. And I'm sure for
Yeah.
an org of Sentinel stature, it was life changing to say the least.
Yeah,
Um, sort of looking at you moving into Sentinels, and you touched on it a little bit, where you had to go from what was effectively like impression farm analytics to actionable ones,
yeah,
if that makes sense, like the Twitter
exactly.
audience capturing ones to stuff that a team can actually use. How easy or difficult did you find that transition? And I guess if you could point to like one main shift in mindset that you had to go through to make that work, what was that process like for you?
It's a good question too. All these are good questions. I keep saying that, but I'm waiting for a bad question. Um, Yeah, so you're right, Anders. It goes from impression farming analytics to actually things that can help send. I mean, that's kind of the mind shift itself. I think just trying to find things that can provide the most value. And I think coming coming from the business background, one of the things my firm kind of preaches to us is something we call 80/20. So it's basically doing 80%, getting 80% of the answer while doing 20% of the work. And so uh, that it comes from, most of the time you can get a pretty good answer with not that much relative effort. And then the remaining part, 20%, to make it technically, 100% perfect, requires a lot of effort, right? So
Diminishing returns, yeah.
yeah, a lot of diminishing returns when you're doing types of analysis or whatnot. So I've always believed in that, and so for Raucous and Sentinels, my initial pitch and my initial way of thinking was also like, okay, what are like there's a million things I could do for them, right? I could look at econ, I could look at ults, I could look at comp win rates, I could look at whatever it is. But what are the few things that in the short amount of time I have that I think can generate the most value for them? And so that's kind of the approach I came into working with Sen. And so I would track all the stats I think were potentially impactful and that are important to a team to understand how good they are, and then point out like, okay, you guys, it was kind of hard because stage 2 obviously they had a few subs and sick was out, and so it's hard to really what data is good. So we ended up using scrim data, which over time actually gets to a good sample size. Yes, we do scrim, but I know that's breaking news. So yeah, I mean, just from that, I really just try to nail down like, okay, there are a few gaps, right? Most teams probably have a lot of gaps in across the board. Some things on attack, some things on defense, whatever. Maybe it's gun rounds, eco rounds, maybe it's the op, whatever it is. So, but in the 2 weeks we had, and everyone talks about this, like it's really not a lot of time, and there are some probably things that showed in the gameplay that there wasn't that much time to practice, but what are the few things in 2 weeks, the most important things that could win us the most rounds? And that's kind of the mindset I had, right? I kind of tried to translate stats to a number of rounds that we could have won if we improved this like one thing. It's not as simple as that because it's just never that simple with data, but that's kind of the mindset I came.
I think that's a great distillation of it. Like, is that going to be all encompassing? Absolutely not. But as far as a one-liner goes, I don't think you're ever going to get much closer.
Yeah, I mean, you're looking for actionable, right? Things that you can actually have impact on. So, let me ask this a little bit, and I'm gonna dig into the clout farming a little bit here. So you've got obviously Shroud and Zelsis coming into the team, right, for this event. So I mean, obviously, expectations for the fans are through the roof and these kind of things. But you, as the analyst, with these two players coming in, regardless of their clout status or whatever, what kind of role do you have in terms of approaching those players and talking to them and having some kind of impact on their play or their decision making? I know it's a short period of time, but what was the process like getting those two players acclimated?
Yeah, so another good question. So the way the communication worked, because I had to be remote, because it was kind of last second, and those guys were at the boot camp. Communication with the players was not as frequent as if I was, working directly with, or honestly just in person. But those guys were definitely, yeah. I mean, the thing is, those guys, like, we were definitely trying to get them up to speed. But I mean, more so Shroud than Zelsis, because Zelsis had obviously played in a structured team pro environment. And so the data definitely, like, it kind of was like, the data would say things about Zelsis and Shrouds, either styles on certain maps or what they were good or were bad at. And so, we would like, I guess, like, we would use that data in a way to, like, okay, guide them and help them figure out, and just kind of reaffirm, like, especially with Shroud, like, hey, look how good you are at this, because I think we really wanted to instill confidence in his play.
What did it say about him planning the spike?
Oh yeah, I think we missed.
I'm sorry. I had to.
We missed that one in the data. Yeah, that was tough. But basically, didn't try to really, like, with the exception of a few things, I think across the few weeks, like, kind of didn't, especially with Shroud, didn't try to change too much of the way they played. Just wanted to get Shroud comfortable. And then a lot of the stats were kind of more team focused, or directed toward, like, the more veterans, where we could kind of be more, I guess, like, honest and kind of more like, okay, we expect kind of this out of you. Let's work on that. That makes sense. And then for Zelsis and Shroud, kind of just letting them get reps in, and pointing out maybe one or two things that were really kind of important, we thought.
And I'm gonna come at you two pronged here. What is your relationship with kind of the players with the information that you're bringing, and if there is a relationship with the players in your guys' dialogue, what are you giving the players versus what you're taking to the other analysts or Raucus, for example? Is there a difference in between what information is going where?
Yeah, so there wasn't too much of a relationship. So basically, the information, like the technical information, would be mostly towards directly towards Raucus and Danny. And I
Hmm.
think the logic there was the players had a lot to. It was just kind of information overload, and they kind of wanted
Mm.
to not filter, but kind of make sure that they present it to them at the right way in the right
Yeah.
right time. And so, kind of most of my work was with in calls or just sending stuff to Raucus and Danny, and then figuring out kind of like, okay, because I think it's definitely not as effective to just present like screenshots or spreadsheets to players. I think
Hmm.
Raucus and Danny being in person would be more like we all thought it was probably just more optimal for it to come from like the head coach. It would probably be much different if I was in person, but that's just like the nature of remote work, I think.
Yeah, death by PowerPoint doesn't work for anybody at
Yeah,
any given time, anywhere.
yeah,
So is it possible without giving up too much or getting too deep into, what you do for Sentinel specifically, or like Sentinel stats specifically? We spoke with Raucus and he couldn't really give us, at the time, he basically just said, you're not necessarily like hard in the anti-stratting or what our anti-strats look like. Instead, you're giving us information and kind of percentage plays, stuff like that is important in Valorant, right? We're always looking for the percentage play. Can you
hmm
give us an example of, going into a matchup against the guard, for example, in what you would be doing, kind of looking into that team and what information you would be looking to bring? Maybe not what you actually did, but
sure.
just kind of holistically.
No, yeah, I mean, I can give you roughly, because I don't know on the top of my head exactly well, I don't know like exact numbers or anything, but basically,
Hmm.
for the guard and for the guard for specifically,
It could be any team,
yeah,
just like kind of how you're dissecting the teams.
yeah. So, for example, 100 Thieves was a good one where I did do a little bit of like anti-strat with the
Okay.
data, because that was like we actually had like I think 5 days or something where the guard we didn't because we just had no like footage and we didn't think it was that useful to look at stage two data. It's so far,
Mm.
anything can change. So basically for like 100 Thieves anti-stratting, I kind of I mean I watched the VODs, but basically I think I would just try to quantify tendencies of them as much as possible. So X% of the time when they shoot a dart on this wall they go B or A. When they have KO ult, they
Mm.
X% of the time they hit A. And so it's pretty basic stuff, but it's honestly because it's very manual. Just because the data you can actually pull publicly from Riot is not that comprehensive. It takes a lot of time to actually get those basic stats, like how often they go
Mm.
B, how often they go A, is honestly and divided by eco rounds, gun rounds, all that type of jazz. What maps, blah blah blah. It actually takes quite a bit of work. Though even though the analysis itself is not too hard. So basically, I was doing that for like basically all the maps under the use played. At least the
Mm.
maps that we thought we would likely play against them. And yeah, man, I think I can't remember exactly um, how correct some of the things were. Like I remembered when I wrote the thing, like on Breeze, like they would do like certain darts, they would always hit the same site. And so I'm pretty sure though when I was watching it, and as a fan, because I'm a fan and an analyst now, like when I'm watching
Hmm.
it, I'm not like I wasn't actually like thinking, oh fuck, like that or that dart, like that was bad information. They changed it up or something. Like I was like, did I miss that?
Yeah.
Like what's going on? But like I'm pretty sure like I mean props to the 100 Thieves, they changed up their stuff quite a bit from the next because we got rolled on them on Breeze. And so I think some of the stuff they did act they definitely changed up their utility setups and their early round stuff, so props on them for that. But that's kind of what I would be basically doing. I think that's one of the main things you can do with data for anti-stratting.
Very cool. I want to jump in here real quick because you mentioned that like a lot of this was super manual, and you mentioned earlier that just because of the timeline and because of the way the roster shifted, it was all like data from scrims. How are you collecting data from scrims? Like obviously we don't have Overwatch style machine learning where it's like literally just reading the screen for you. So like what was your, I assume that it was largely manual transcription. How were you working through scrims data? Like where were you even getting these numbers to work with?
Yeah, it was 100% manual. So I would just watch the scrims, and I mean, I had a massive spreadsheet of, I don't know, it must be like like 1,000 rows of 1,000 rows, 20 columns. So you can kind of I mean, some of them are just like the same, right? It's just like the date or whatever. But yeah, I mean, I was just manually writing down like who killed what, who killed who, what site, what was the retake setup, what was the postman setup, what ults, stuff like that. As you know, I was like watching the stream, so it was not like I was working like kind of doubling the amount of work, I guess. So it's kind of just like, but you also like when you're doing that, you can't actually. It's harder to actually think about like the game and what's going on and like
watching
strategy.
In
Yeah,
heavy
you're just like
quotes.
you're literally just like trying to record everything, and so who knows? Maybe I don't know how it works in the other esports, but one day maybe we'll get like that being able to not do it manually, because I think, and maybe 2023 franchising is just enough data that you don't need to use scrims. I think that would be great, though I don't know if everyone knows the exact format of the frequency of games. But yeah, I think scrim data was kind of what we had to use, so yeah, it just had to be done.
So I want to real quick, if we have enough time here, to kind of build on what you're saying. Like some of the, I'm starting to see some ideas for what you want to see potentially in the future. Maybe this is a broad question, but what do you envision as the future of analysts in Valorant? Like, how do you foresee them kind of taking Valorant to the next level?
Yeah. So I think long term, I think so. Truth be, I mean, this is a really really good question. I think long term data is going to play a huge role in Valorant, or it should. I just think there's a ton of opportunity. There's a ton of data available, and I think the teams that invest in good data analysts earlier on will be better than the teams that kind of don't believe in the data. And it takes time for any sport, esport, whatever it is, to kind of trust data, because you have people who've played the game for 5, 10, 15, 20 years that never used data, right? It just wasn't available. It wasn't a thing. Even like for something like baseball is like the analogy I use, like, right, Moneyball, which was the revolution of data that changed the way the game is played. So I mean, it's gradual. Like data will be first used to kind of plug holes, plug leaks, just track basic tracking, and then that's like kind of level 1, and then level 2 is kind of like the whole revolution of like, maybe we don't even play the game correctly. Like maybe you're supposed to half buy every round, like or like force every single round. Like who knows, right? No one actually knows. And so I get it. Maybe that's how CS:GO was or whatever, but and maybe I'm missing some papers or real good analyses of that being the correct way to play. But I think there's just a ton of in 2 or 3 years or 4 years, I think it's very possible that the game is played in a very different way. Maybe defense, you're like literally supposed to like 5 stack a site every time,
just gamble stack every game,
never spread out like that. That could very be possible, but just no one knows. And so it's exciting for the future. I do think, back kind of to the original point, I think in the near future, I think teams will start to hopefully invest in like one strategical kind of macro analyst. So for Sentinels, that would be like Danny, and then one more on the data side, while everyone's working together. But you just can't do everything. You just can't do everything as one person.
I've tried. It doesn't work.
There it is, from experience and from Weltis' mouth. It doesn't work to try and do it all. Well, that's all the time we've got for this interview specifically. If you guys want to find out more and you want to continue to pick the brain, at Weltis Games on Twitter and on Twitch is where you can find Matthew here, but he's not leaving just yet. We are going to hop away for a short break. We got some Champions talk to continue after this, but Our party grows by one. We're going to be bringing in Jesco right after this.